Imagine a place where the air is so thin and the silence so heavy that you can hear your own pulse. It's April 11th, 1981 in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The resort town of Keddie, California is supposed to be a sanctuary, a cluster of rustic cabins tucked away from the noise of the world, but inside Cabin 28, the silence isn't peaceful. It's suffocating. While the rest of the town slept, an unspeakable violence was unfolding that will shake the small town forever. Tonight, we venture deep into the woods to unravel a case that has remained unsolved for over 4 decades. The Keddie murders. A gruesome crime that not only stole innocent lives, but shattered an entire community. A town that once represented escape and peace now carried an inescapable darkness. One that still lingers today. What happened in Cabin 28? Who was responsible for this unspeakable crime? And why, over 4 decades later, do we still not have all the answers? Lock your doors, turn down the lights, and try to keep your heart rate steady. This is True Crime on the Brain. Trigger warnings include violence, murder, sexual assault, and child victims. Listener discretion is advised. There's something unsettling about a town that time has forgotten. Keddie, California, once a quaint vacation getaway nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, was already a shadow of its former self by the early 1980s. The cabins, once filled with families escaping city life, now stood as relics of past prosperity. It was here, in this somewhat faded resort town, that Glenna Susan Sharp, known as Sue, sought a fresh start. A 36-year-old single mother, Sue had moved to Keddie in the fall of 1980, renting the spacious Cabin 28. She had come west from Connecticut after leaving a broken marriage, bringing her 5 children with her, hoping for a new beginning. Life in Keddie was supposed to be quiet, safe, an escape from the struggles she had endured. But what was meant to be a refuge would soon become the setting for one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. Sue's children included 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, and her 2 younger boys, 10-year-old Rick and 5-year-old Greg. That weekend, John's 17-year-old friend, Dana Wingate, and Rick and Greg's friend, Justin Eason, were also at the cabin. It should have been an ordinary night, but by the morning of April 12, 1981, Cabin 28 would be the site of unimaginable horror. April 11, 1981 began like any other day in the quiet tucked-away town of Keddie. No signs, no warnings, just another Saturday in the mountains. That afternoon, Sue drove into Quincy, a neighboring town only a few miles away, with Sheila and Greg. They were on their way to pick up Rick from his baseball tryouts when they spotted John and his best friend Dana hitchhiking along the road. Back then, it wasn't unusual for kids to hitchhike. It was common in rural towns like this, where everyone seemed to know each other. Sue pulled over and gave the boys a lift back home to Keddie. Later, John and Dana headed back into Quincy the same way they had come, by thumbing a ride. That evening, they were seen downtown, possibly visiting friends. Meanwhile, back at Cabin 28, Sue had allowed her younger boys, Rick and Greg, to have their friend Justin over for a sleepover. Tina and Sheila spent part of the evening next door at Cabin 27 with the Seabolt family. The Seabolts in Cabin 27 was comprised of James Sr. and his wife Zanita, their children James Jr., who went by Jamie, and daughters Alyssa and Paula. Sheila and Tina spent their entire evening watching TV with their friends Alyssa and Paula. They had left Cabin 28 around 8 p.m., with Tina returning home around 10 p.m. and Sheila spending the night with her friends. The night was shaping up to be uneventful. At some point, Sue declined an invitation from her neighbors in Cabin 26, Martin Smart, who went by Marty, his wife Marilyn, and their friend Bo Bubuday, to join them for drinks at the Backdoor Bar, a local bar in town. Instead, she stayed in, looking after the kids. At some point between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., John and Dana hitchhiked another ride back home. The driver who picked them up would later describe an eerie feeling, something unsettling about the night. No one could have imagined what was about to unfold. Sunday morning, April 12, 1981, Sheila walked the short path back to Cabin 28, expecting an ordinary Sunday morning. But as she reached for the door, something was off. An odor, thick and metallic, hit her at first. Then she stepped inside. The sight before her would haunt her forever. In the living room, the bodies of her mother, her brother John, and his best friend Dana lay lifeless. Blood spattered the walls. The brutality was beyond comprehension. Sheila let out a scream that shattered the morning silence, and then bolted back to the Seabolt's cabin. The neighbors rushed to help, but nothing could prepare them for what they saw inside. Then came another shock. In the back bedroom, Sue's two youngest sons, Greg and Rick, along with their friend Justin, were sound asleep, untouched, unharmed, oblivious to the nightmare just outside their door. Jamie Seabolt from Cabin 27, one of the neighbors, helped them escape through a window in the bedroom, shielding them from the carnage in the next room. How? How could three young boys sleep through something so violent, so savage? And why were they spared? From that moment on, the town of Keddie would never be the same. The scene inside Cabin 28 was nothing short of a nightmare, a massacre frozen in time. Near the sofa in the living room, Sue Sharp lay on her side, partially nude, covered by a yellow blanket. A blue bandana and her own underwear had been forced into her mouth and secured with medical tape. Her hands and feet were tightly bound with electrical wiring. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and throat. Deep, deliberate wounds. But that wasn't all. Blunt force trauma to her head had left an imprint, one that matched the butt of a BB or pellet rifle. Just feet away, her son John lay face up on the floor, his body showing the same cruel pattern of violence. His hands and feet were bound, his throat slashed, his skull fractured. Next to him, Dana face down, his feet tied to John's with electrical cord. Dana's cause of death was even more disturbing. Multiple blunt force injuries to the head and manual strangulation. Blood spatter painted the walls and ceiling of the living room, stark against the once cheerful ivy-patterned wallpaper. The evidence was clear. This was where the murders had taken place. But blood wasn't just confined to the living room. It was found on bedding in the room Sue shared with her daughters, on bedroom doors, and even on the handrail of the back stairs. Investigators recovered several weapons from the scene, each one telling a story of the horror that unfolded that night. A kitchen knife bent from the sheer force used to stab, another knife also covered in blood, a pellet gun. The variety of weapons, the extent of the injuries, it all pointed to a terrifying possibility. This wasn't the work of a single person. The sheer brutality, the control exerted over the victims, the methodical binding, it strongly suggested that more than one perpetrator was involved. And then there was Sue. The way her body was positioned, the fact that she was partially undressed, it felt personal. It felt deliberate. Was this an act of rage, a message, or was it something even darker? And yet, the strangest part? The neighbors just feet away claimed they heard nothing. The Seabolt family living in Cabin 27, barely 15 feet from the crime, reported no significant disturbances, just silence. A couple staying in a nearby cabin did recall something. Muffled screams around 1:15 a.m., but were those screams coming from Cabin 28? No one could say for sure. And then perhaps the biggest mystery of all. In the back bedroom, three young boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were found unharmed, asleep, untouched by the horrors just outside their door. How? How could such an act of unrelenting violence unfold in the same house and they remained undisturbed? Did they really sleep through it? The more investigators uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. And yet, for all the blood, for all the evidence, one question loomed over everything. Why? As if this case wasn't complex enough, Justin Smart's testimony only deepened the mystery. At first, Justin claimed he had slept through everything. No noises, no screams. But as time went on, his story began to change. In later interviews, he spoke of a dream where he saw John and Dana locked in a violent struggle with a man wielding a hammer. But was it really a dream? Then, under hypnosis, Justin described something even more unsettling. He saw Sue in the cabin with two men, but who were they? And what exactly had he witnessed? The use of hypnosis to recover memories is controversial at best. It raises serious questions about the reliability of Justin's recollections. Was he unlocking buried memories, or were these false images planted in his mind unintentionally shaped by suggestion? And then there's the bigger question. How does a crime this brutal, this chaotic, unfold in a small cabin without waking three young boys in the next room? The lack of any reported disturbance from the Seabolts next door, combined with the survival of Ricky, Greg, and Justin, is baffling. The attack would have been loud, violent, and yet the boys remained untouched. Then there's the issue of the composite sketches. When Justin described the two men he allegedly saw, law enforcement turned to an amateur, a local with no forensic sketching experience to create the drawings. A critical piece of evidence left in the hands of someone unqualified. Why were these sketches treated as legitimate? Why was a child's fragmented, possibly unreliable testimony used as a foundation for identifying potential suspects? And most importantly, what did Justin really see that night? The inconsistencies in the story, the hypnosis session, the questionable handling of evidence, it all adds to the overwhelming sense that something about this case was mishandled from the very beginning. And the deeper we dig, the more the cracks begin to show. In the wake of the Keddie murders, suspicion quickly settled on one man, Marty Smart. He wasn't just any neighbor. He lived just 2 cabins away in cabin 26. He worked as a chef at the Backdoor Bar, the same bar where he'd been drinking on the night of April 11th, 1981. And perhaps more importantly, he had a reason to hate Sue Sharp. Marty's marriage to Marilyn Smart was unraveling, and in his mind, Sue was to blame. She had reportedly encouraged Marilyn to leave him, to get away from what many described as a volatile, angry man. And then there was the hammer. Marty told investigators that one of his claw hammers had mysteriously gone missing around the time of the murders. A seemingly random detail, until you consider the fact that a claw hammer was one of the weapons used to bludgeon the victims in cabin 28. Then came the letter. After the murders, while Marty was in Reno, he wrote a letter to his wife Marilyn. One sentence in particular stood out. "I've paid the price for your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." A very chilling statement, one that to many sounded an awful lot like a confession. But here's where things get even stranger. This letter, this potentially incriminating piece of evidence, was reportedly overlooked in the original investigation. And then, another bombshell. A therapist in Reno came forward claiming that Marty had outright confessed to killing Sue and Tina Sharp, but he denied having anything to do with John and Dana's deaths. A direct confession, a missing murder weapon, a motive, and yet somehow the case against Marty Smart never went anywhere. Despite all these red flags, law enforcement didn't push hard enough. Leads went cold, evidence was brushed aside, a suspect was right there, but no arrests were made. Why? One thing is clear. Whatever happened inside cabin 28 that night, the truth was buried along with the victims. As the investigation continued, another man came under scrutiny. John Bubiday, also known as Bo. Bo was an ex-convict, a drifter, and a man with alleged ties to organized crime in Chicago. Bo wasn't just passing through Keddie. He was staying in cabin 26, just steps away from the crime scene. He had been drinking at the Backdoor Bar with Marty Smart on the night of April 11th, and after Marilyn Smart went to bed, Marty and Bo reportedly returned to the cabin. So the question is, what happened after that? Unlike Marty, Bo didn't have an obvious personal connection to Sue Sharp or her family. But his criminal past, his presence in Keddie at the time, and his sudden departure shortly after the murders painted him as a person of interest. It wasn't just Bo and Marty's movements that raised suspicion. In the early days of the investigation, authorities explored other theories, some more outlandish than others. There were whispers of ritualistic killings, murmurs of a drug-related motive, but Sheriff Doug Thomas shut those theories down fast. He claimed no drug paraphernalia or illegal substances were ever found in cabin 28. With that, investigators turned their focus back to individuals with personal ties to the victims, people like Bo and Marty. But just as the investigation was struggling to find solid ground, another shocking twist emerged. Tina Sharp was missing. In the chaos of that horrific morning, it wasn't immediately clear that Sue's 12-year-old daughter was nowhere to be found. Hours passed before authorities realized she wasn't among the victims or the surviving children. Was it critical oversight? A moment of disorganization? Or was Tina's disappearance the key to understanding what really happened inside cabin 28? When investigators realized 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing from cabin 28, a chilling question loomed over the case. Had she been taken? Given the sheer brutality inflicted on her mother, her brother, and his friend, the idea that Tina might still be alive somewhere was both a flicker of hope and a terrifying unknown. For 3 years, that question remained unanswered. And then, in April of 1984, a discovery would shatter any lingering hope. A bottle collector wandering through a wooded area near Camp 18 near Feather Falls in Butte County, between 50 to 60 miles from Keddie, stumbled upon a human skull. Scattered nearby were additional bone fragments. Forensic analysis would later confirm the unthinkable. The remains belonged to Tina Sharp. Her body had been transported miles away from the crime scene and concealed in a remote location. It was a deliberate act, one that spoke to the killer's calculated effort to make sure Tina was never found. But then, something even more unsettling happened. Shortly after the remains were discovered, an anonymous call came into the Butte County Sheriff's Office. The voice on the other end, calm, confident, almost knowing. They claimed that the remains found near Feather Falls were those of Tina Sharp. And here's the disturbing part. The call came before authorities had officially confirmed the identity. Whoever this caller was, they knew something the public didn't. Yet, incredibly, this phone call, the call that could have held the key to unlocking the truth, wasn't thoroughly investigated. In fact, it wasn't even officially documented at the time. Years later, buried at the bottom of an old evidence box, a recording of that call was rediscovered by a cold case investigator. By then, decades had passed. And the caller, long gone. So who was it? A taunting killer reveling in their secrets? An accomplice finally overwhelmed by guilt? Or someone who knew more than they ever let on? One thing is certain. Tina Sharp's disappearance, her murder, the murder of Sue, John, and Dana without waking the boys, and that anonymous phone call remain some of the most disturbing unanswered questions in the Keddie case. And to this day, those answers remain just out of reach. For decades, the Keddie murders remained frozen in time, an unsolved nightmare that loomed over the community like a specter. Leads went cold, suspects disappeared, and the case slowly slipped into the realm of legend, whispered about but never resolved. But then something changed. In recent years, the case has seen a resurgence. New evidence, fresh eyes, and the relentless pursuit of justice. In 2016, investigators announced something chilling. They were finally making progress. And then, a discovery. A hammer. One matching the exact description of the one Marty Smart had claimed went missing, was pulled from a pond near the entrance to the Keddie resort. The implications were staggering. Could this be the very weapon used in the brutal bludgeoning deaths inside Cabin 28? If so, it placed Smart's own words under a damning spotlight. Had he, in a moment of desperation, discarded the weapon mere steps away from the crime scene thinking it would never be found? And that wasn't the only revelation. Digging through old case files, investigators stumbled upon an envelope, one that unbelievably had never been opened. Inside, a cassette tape. And on that tape, the voice of the anonymous caller who in 1984 had revealed the location of Tina Sharp's remains, before the authorities had even confirmed her identity. For over 30 years, this piece of evidence had gone unnoticed, buried in the depths of evidence discarded, collecting dust while the truth waited to be uncovered. Now, with modern forensic advancements, investigators had the tools to analyze the recording, to identify the voice, to finally ask who made that call. And what else did they know? The hammer, the tape, the renewed focus on the case, each discovery peeled back another layer of this decades-old mystery, inching closer to an answer. And yet, even with these breakthroughs, one question still lingers in the air like a ghost. Will justice ever truly be served? For decades, the case of the Keddie murder stood like a wall of unanswered questions, a cold case frozen in time. But in 2018, investigators made a breakthrough. One thing that could change everything. DNA. A single piece of white medical tape recovered from the crime scene inside Cabin 28 held a secret. A genetic fingerprint waiting to be uncovered. And when forensic analysts finally extracted a DNA profile, the results sent a shiver down the spines of those working on the case. The DNA matched a known, living suspect. Who was this person? What did they know? Were they present in Cabin 28 on that fateful night? While authorities have not publicly disclosed the suspect's identity, the revelation marked the first tangible scientific link to someone still alive, a person who could potentially provide the missing puzzle piece investigators have been searching for. For Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg, the discovery was fuel for their relentless pursuit of justice. They had long believed that the case was solvable, that somewhere, buried beneath decades of missteps and silence, the truth still lay waiting, and despite the deaths of primary suspects Marty Smart and Bo, the investigators believe that not everyone involved has escaped justice. There are those still living, those who may have helped cover up the crime, those who know more than they've ever admitted, and the time to speak is running out. The discovery of a hammer matching Smart's missing weapon the resurfacing of an overlooked 911 call, and now the identification of a living suspect through DNA. Each new piece of evidence reignites the hope that the victims, Sue, John, Tina, and Dana, may finally receive the justice they deserve. But after more than 4 decades, will the full truth ever come to light? And just how close are investigators to uncovering what really happened in Cabin 28 that night? Now, the cabin is gone. It was demolished back in 2004, but the ground it sat on still remains cold. As we close the file on this case for tonight, we're left with the most haunting question of all. Who else was in the woods that night? And are they still walking among us? What are your theories? Leave a comment below or head over to our Instagram to talk about it. Join us next Friday where I will tell you about another case that has been weighing heavily on my brain. As always, stay sane with true crime on the brain.